Well, let's talk about our basic building blocks of harmony. The beginnings of jazz and early jazz, we had harmonies called triads. Eventually these triads were superseded by seventh chords and ninths, elevenths, and 13ths, which we'll talk about later. But right now it's important in the development of your understanding of harmony to know how to build this basic building block of harmony, which is called triads. Triads came about in music history in the Baroque period, basically, when we had the beginnings of our harmonic understanding, keys, key signatures, things like that. Johann Sebastian Bach, George Frederick Handel, other Baroque composers like this. So there's basically four types of triads, and let's go about learning how to build these. If you understand how to play your major scales and know a little bit about key signatures, this is a little bit easier. So let's go ahead and start with that. The first main type of triad that we're going to learn how to build is called a major triad. If you know the C major scale, it's easy to find your major triad. Here's a C major scale. Easiest way to build a major triad is knowing that the major triad, C major triad, is the 1, 3, and 5 of the C major scale. C, E, and G make a C major triad. That's the first and easiest way to learn how to build a triad, a major triad. That is 1, 3, and 5 of a major scale. There are a couple other ways to think about this, though. We could also look at this for what kind of intervals are being structured here to make this chord. We can see that on the outside we have what's called a perfect fifth, whereas on the inside we have a major third. That's another way to think about a major triad. Perfect fifth on the outside and a major third on the inside. Another way to think of a major triad is that the bottom interval is a major third and the top interval is a minor third. C up to E is a major third and E up to G is a minor third. So that's three different ways to think about building a major triad. So we know how to build a C major triad. There's a C major triad. If you have any of these symbols, C, C with a large M, C with a triangle, CMA, or CMAJ, or even C7. We'll talk about that later, what that means. But any of these symbols, you would be building a C major triad. Let's build a major triad from some different pitches. How about from F, from A flat, from B, and from E? Probably the easiest way to do this, as I said, was to know your major scales and know what 1, 3, 5 of a major scale is. So from F, the F major scale would be F, G, A, B flat, C, D, E. So 1, 3, 5 of that F major scale is F, A, and C. The other important thing to know about building any kind of triad is that it has to be spelled space, 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 as in this one, or line, 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 as in the C major triad. Regardless of how the accidentals are lining up with your chords, you have to be able to spell them space, 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 or line, line, line if we're putting them in root position. The next one, A flat. Let's go ahead and build this one that second way, which is a perfect fifth on the outside and a major third on the bottom. So a perfect fifth from A flat would be A flat up to E flat. And a major third in the middle. Well, we know it's going to be a C of some kind, and sure enough, A flat up to C is a major third. So here's our A flat major triad. From B, let's do that the other way. A major third on the bottom, or two whole steps. Two whole steps from B would be up to D sharp. We're calling it a D sharp and not an E flat, because remember, we have to build this particular triad space, 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 since it's starting on a B, which is on a space. Finally, on top, we would get a minor third. Minor third from D sharp is an F sharp. So B, D sharp, F sharp. That's our B major triad. And the last one from E. Let's do major scale, first 5 notes of the E major scale, E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, and we just find 1, 3, and 5 of that, E, G sharp, and B. That gives us our E major triad. Okay, so that's a major. There's some symbols you might see with this. F major might look like that. A flat triangle, that might be an A flat major triad. B, MA, that's for a B major triad. And possibly E, let's see, what do we have left? Large M, that's E major triad. So now go to the next main type of triad. This one's called a minor triad. A couple of ways to think about a minor triad. The easiest way to think about a C minor triad would be to take the major triad, C, E, and G, and lower the third by a half step. But just like with the major triad, they have to be spelled line, 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 or space, space, space. So if we have this C major triad like this and we lower the third, we're going to call that an E flat. Symbols associated with minor: small m, MI, MIN, and the minus sign. Any of those are designating that it's a minor triad. The other way to think of a minor triad would be 1, 3, 5 of a C minor scale. In this case, C, E flat, and G. Another way to think of it would be for its intervallic structure. The outside of a minor triad is also going to be a perfect fifth, just like we had for the major. And the interval in the middle is actually a minor third. So a minor third on the bottom and a perfect fifth on the outside. Another way, that last way to think of it, would be what kinds of intervals are being stacked on top of each other. We have a minor third on the bottom of a minor triad, but a major third, E flat up to G, on top. There we go. Any of those 4 ways you think about how to build a minor triad, they'll all work. But let's try to build a minor triad from some other pitches now. This time, let's do E flat, A, B flat, and how about C sharp? Okay, well, first way, build an E flat major triad and then lower the third. Well, the first, third, and fifth note of an E flat major scale are E flat, G, and B flat. That gives us a major triad, so to make it minor, we lower the third. Well, it has to be a G of some kind, so lowering a G by a half step makes it a G flat. Well, let's try a different way. How about 1, 3, 5 of an A minor scale? Well, the first, third, and fifth note of the A minor scale are A, C, and E. So we'd have those 3 notes, A, C, and E. The next one, how about building this one a different way? Perfect fifth on the outside and a minor third in the middle. So we would have a perfect fifth from B flat, would be an F, and then a minor third, just a step and a half. Well, it's going to have to be a D of some kind, and when you build that, you see that it would have to be a D flat. So there's your B flat minor triad. C sharp. Let's build this one that other way, that final way, which is a minor third on the bottom, followed by a major third on top. So a minor third from C sharp, well, we know that it's going to have to be spelled C, E, G, because all triads have to fall into that pattern of line, 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 or space, space, space. So a minor third above C sharp is E, and a major third above E, like the first or the third note of the E major scale, would be a G sharp. Everybody has a different way for how they build it. A lot of people like to build a major triad first and then just lower the third. Whichever way works for you is fine. Just eventually what you'll have to do is drill these so that they become natural and you can find them quickly. Because with any kind of music, but especially in jazz, you have to know how to build your chords quickly because the tunes go by sometimes pretty rapidly. So that's minor triads. Really what it turns out all of these triads are just different combinations of major and minor thirds. So far, the types of triads that we've built, a major triad has a major third on the bottom and a minor third on top. The minor triad that we just built has a minor third on the bottom and a major third on top. Now let's build one that has a major third on the bottom and a major third on top. So that would be from C up a major third would be an E, and a major third above E would be a G sharp. Two stacked major thirds. This one is called an augmented triad. Augmented triad, two stacked major thirds. That's one way to think of it. Another way to think of it is always relating it back to that major triad, and you can see that as compared to a C major triad, this is a C major triad with a raised fifth. So if you know how to build your major triads, just raise the fifth and that gives you augmented. Another way to build it would be this happens to be the first, third, and fifth note of a whole tone scale. That sounds something like this. C, D, E, F sharp, G sharp. Another way to build it would be knowing that the outside interval is an augmented fifth and the inside interval is a major third. Symbols associated with an augmented triad are the plus sign, in this case C plus, or every once in a while the abbreviation AUG. So any of those symbols you're going to use a augmented triad. Let's try building an augmented triad from a few different pitches. How about from D? How about from G? A flat, and how about D flat? Well, actually I think let's change that D flat to F sharp. Let's try that. Okay, so from D, probably the easiest way is build a major triad and then raise the fifth. So the first, third, and fifth notes of the D major scale are D, F sharp, and A. That's a D major triad. So in order to make this augmented, we're going to raise that fifth, but we have to call it an A something. So raising an A by a half step and still calling it an A, we're going to have to call that an A sharp. There we go, with a D augmented triad. Now let's go on to G. G major triad, you know it's going to be GBD, and that turns out to be the first, third, and fifth note of the G major scale. So if we just take that D and raise it by a half step, it's going to become a D sharp. And there's your G augmented triad. A flat augmented, same thing. Let's build a A flat major triad. You know it has to be A flat, C, and some kind of E. And the first, third, and fifth note of the A flat major scale are A flat, C, and E flat. So this gives us our A flat major triad. But if we were to raise that E flat by a half step, that would make it an E natural. So here's our E flat augmented, or excuse me, our A flat augmented triad. F sharp, this is an interesting one because we know that it has to be space, 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 so it has to be spelled F sharp, A, and C. The first, third, and fifth note of the F sharp major scale are F sharp, F sharp, A sharp, and C sharp. That would give us a major triad. F sharp, A sharp, and C sharp. But remember, for augmented, we have to raise that fifth by a half step. So it would actually become a C sharp sharp, or a C double sharp. We have a symbol for double sharp. Instead of using two sharps next to each other, we have a new symbol, which is the X, and the X is what stands for double sharp. So instead of C sharp, or C sharp sharp, we're going to put that X next to that C, and that gives us our F double sharp, or excuse me, our F sharp augmented triad with the C double sharp on top. So that's 3 types of triads: major, minor, and augmented. Now remember, we're building thirds in different arrangements. Only major and minor thirds here. So far we had a major third on the bottom with a minor third on top for major. For minor, we had a minor third on the bottom and a major third on top. For augmented triads, we had 2 stacked major thirds, so that only leaves 1 more combination to give us our 4th triad. Our 4th triad, obviously, we are going to stack 2 minor thirds, a minor third on top of a minor third. And when we do this, it gives us our final triad, which is called diminished. Diminished triad is 2 stacked minor thirds. So from C, we would go up a step and a half. We know that it has to be an E of some kind and a G of some kind. So going up a minor third from C, we would get an E flat and a minor third above that E flat. A step and a half above that would be a G flat. You can even count half steps if you need to. Minor third on the bottom and a minor third on top. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is, once again, compare it to a major triad. When you compare the C diminished triad to a major triad, you can see that we're going to lower the 3rd and the 5th. So if we took C major, C, E, and G, and lowered the 3rd and lowered the 5th, we would get C, E flat, and G flat. Another way to do it would be to look at the interval on the outside. And if you've studied some music theory, you know that this outside interval is a diminished 5th. So we'd have a diminished 5th on the outside and a minor 3rd on the inside. And another way would be to find a scale that's appropriate for this. And it turns out that this is the 1st, 3rd, and 5th note of a C diminished scale. It's a scale we'll study in a while. That scale sounds something like this. It's an 8-tone scale. C, E flat, and G flat. Symbols associated with the diminished triad are the circle, C circle. Every once in a while you might see dim. And there's a 7th chord called half diminished. We'll talk about that later. But there's a symbol that looks like a circle with a line through it. And if you're just building triads, you would actually build a diminished triad when you see this symbol also. So let's build a few diminished triads from some different pitches. I think we can leave that up there. How about building a diminished triad from F? How about from G sharp? That's going to be a tough one. How about from B? And then finally we'll leave it at E. So the F diminished triad, one thing I like to do at this point is just to make sure I understand that all of these chords have to be line, 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 and space, space, space. So I go ahead and just fill in this because I know they have to be spelled like this with whatever accidentals I need. So an F diminished triad, well, there's an F major triad, FAC. So if I lower the 3rd and the 5th, this A becomes an A flat, and that C becomes a C flat. Make sure you call it a C flat, not a B. G sharp diminished is kind of a tough one because there really is no G sharp major scale, and it's just a more difficult interval to figure out, pitch to figure out intervals from. We know it's 2 minor thirds, and those are step and a half. So if we go a step and a half from G sharp, we would get up to B. And if we get a step and a half or a minor third up from B, we would get to D. So here, as we have it right here, is our G sharp diminished triad. B diminished. Let's build it from the major scale and then alter it. So the B major scale, 1, 3, and 5, would be B, D sharp, and F sharp. B, D sharp, and F sharp would be your B major triad. So if we're going to alter this B major triad to make it diminished, remember we're going to lower the 3rd and lower the 5th. So if we lower a D sharp by a half step, it becomes a D natural. And if we lower that F sharp by a half step, it becomes an F natural. So here we have the only diminished chord that is all white keys or unaltered pitches. B, D, and F is a B diminished triad. And finally from E over there, let's go the route of building it from a major scale and altering it. So the first 5 notes of an E major scale would be E, F sharp, G sharp, A, and B. So we have E, G sharp, and B. That gives us our major triad. Now if we want to adjust it to become diminished, that G sharp would be lowered by a half step, making it a G natural. And the B would be lowered by a half step, making it a B flat. So there's our E diminished triad. You can hear that the diminished triad has kind of an unstable sound, as does the augmented triad has an unstable sound. The major triad sounds stable and happy, whereas the minor triad sounds stable yet sad. Okay, so those are our four main types of triads: major, minor, augmented, and diminished. Remember how I explained that it's important to understand that all triads have to be spelled line, 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 or space, space, space when we're putting them in their simplest or root position. So that really means that we only have 7 different spellings of triads. Every triad has to either be a CEG, a DFA, an EGB, an FAC, a GBD, an ACE, or a BDF. Now there might be some alterations, there might be some accidentals thrown in here. A triad might be C E flat G, or E G sharp B, or F A flat C, but still it has to be spelled in one of these kind of alphabetical configurations to be a triad. There is no triad that is FGB or ABD. Has to be one of these 7 configurations. Let's look at exercise number 1 and build a few of the triads from each of these pitches in that exercise. So the first one asks for you to build a C major triad. Well, we won't build that one because we've built it already, but how about an E flat major triad? Probably the easiest way to do it is just 1, 3, 5 of the E flat major scale. E flat, F, G, A flat, and B flat. So that would give us E flat, G, and B flat is our E flat major triad. Let's change the clef just for the heck of it and go to our next one, an F sharp major triad. Well, here's F sharp on the bass clef. I know that this has to be an FAC, so I can put those pitches up. And 1, 3, 5 of the F sharp major scale would have two more accidentals: F sharp, A sharp, and C sharp. So our major triad, that kind of happy, stable sound, F sharp major would be F sharp, A sharp, and C sharp. And there's your E flat major and F sharp major triad. Let's build a couple of the minors. First one I asked for is D minor. How about 1, 3, 5 of the D minor scale? That would be D, E, F, G, A. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 1, 3, 5 would be D, F, and A. That would give us our D minor triad. The next one it asks for is an F minor triad. Well, I know F major is here, F, A, and C. So if I lower that third by a half step, that's going to give me my F minor triad. Let's go on to the next one, augmented. Do 2 of those. E augmented. Okay, E plus. Well, once again, I know it has to be EGB. It must be spelled that way. Now I can just take a major triad and raise the 5th. That's the kind of the system we use for building augmented. So an E major triad, well, 1, 3, 5 of the E major scale, E, G sharp, and B. That's our E major triad. So if we raise the 5th, that B does not become a C, it actually becomes a B sharp. So there's your correctly spelled E augmented triad. And the second one we have there is G. G augmented triad. GBD is a G major triad, so by raising the 5th by a half step, it becomes a D sharp. That's G augmented. Finally, for diminished, Let's look at the first, well, I think we might have done those. Let's look at the last two, E and A sharp. An E diminished triad. Well, I know it has to be spelled this way, line, line, line. What I could do is make an E major triad and lower the top two pitches by a half step. So let's go ahead and do that. E, G sharp, and B makes an E major triad, E, G sharp, and B. So if I were to lower the third by a half step, that would make it a G natural. And remember, for diminished, you need to lower the fifth also, so that B would become a B flat. And there's our E diminished triad. And the last one asked for is quite a difficult one. That's A sharp. An A sharp diminished triad. This does show up every once in a while, so you do have to learn how to build it. I know that this chord has to be spelled space, space, space. So it has to be some kind of C and some kind of E. Well, this is a tough one to build. Maybe we'll go the route of counting half steps or two stacked minor thirds. So from A sharp, I go up a step and a half, B, C, and C sharp. And from C sharp, I'm going to count up two half steps, C sharp, D, D sharp, and E. C sharp to E is a minor third. So here we have our A sharp diminished triad.